Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores human behavior through a behavioral science lens. I'm Kurt.
And I'm Tim. We like to explore why we do what we do with researchers, authors, and practitioners in a conversational setting in order to share their insights with you.
Before we get into our conversation for this episode, we just want to thank you for checking out Behavior Grooves. We hope that you're inspired by listening to conversations that inspire us. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe or leave a 5-star rating or even write a short little review for us.
Yeah, and if you find that our conversations bring some meaning to you, to your life, to your work, head right over to our Patreon site at www.patreon.com/behavioral grooves and choose a subscription level that's right for you. We would really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and Tim, we recently had a couple of subscriptions, and we want to thank both Ira and Bonnie for their generous contributions. That support goes a long way, and you guys are just freaking great.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Ira. We really appreciate your support, and we hope that every listener gets inspired by their subscriptions.
Okay, now, Tim, how about we head back to this episode?
All the way back. Good call, Kurt. Okay, so in this episode, we talk with two of the founding members of GAABS, which is the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists, about this new organization. And they founded it to bring some standards and regulation to the burgeoning field of applied behavioral science.
Yes, and although they want to bring some minimum standards to the table for those of us who are in the business of applying behavioral science, who are often referred to as practitioners, they have an advisory board that includes some of the greatest living researchers, including Daniel Kahneman and Robert Cialdini. GAABS is getting off to a great start, and you might want to think about joining as well.
Yeah, you might. And as much as we focused on GAABS, it's worth noting that two of our guests are remarkable people in their own rights. Nuala Walsh is a contributor to Harvard Business Review and is the founder of MindEquity, which is a behavioral science consultancy based in Ireland. And Steve Martin is the co-author with Robert Cialdini and Noah Goldstein of Yes, 50 Secrets from the Science of Persuasion, which has sold 1 million copies. I think 27 languages it's been translated into. It's amazing.
Oh, so just a couple books sold, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. And Tim, we need to mention that both Nuala and Steve have been guests on Behavioral Grooves before. There you go. Yep. So Nuala was in episode 203, just happened not that long ago. And Steve was in episode 110 with his co-author, Joe Marks. And together they wrote Messengers, who we listen to, who we don't, and why. Fantastic episode. Actually, both of them. But man, go back and check those out.
And Steve's book, Messengers, one of our favorites. Absolutely.
Yes, it hit our top 10 the year that it came out. Yeah.
But in this episode, you're going to hear about what GAABS is all about and about the future of behavioral science, at least from our humble position.
Yeah, humble position that we are. And you'll want to hear that Steve has come up with to refer to a gathering of behavioral scientists. So it's not a murder of crows. It's a flock of seagulls. It is you'll have to wait and see. You'll have to wait and see what a gathering of behavioral scientists is called.
Is it more like cows and horses?
I don't know what that means. I'm not sure. It's much cooler than anything for cows and horses, though. So You'll have to listen to hear that word that he chooses.
Ooh, okay, Groovers. With that, we hope you sit back with a fresh pour of applied behavioral science certification and enjoy our conversation with Nuala Walsh and Steve Martin. Steve Martin and Nuala Walsh, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here.
It's good to see both
welcome back.
of you.
We are glad to have both of you back and together. This will be really fun. And we're going to start with a speed round like we always. You guys have gone through this. You know the routine. However, we may have some special speed round questions for you today. So
we might.
We'll start. The first one is not special. This is one we've used with others, but a day at the beach or a day in the mountains? Nuala, which would you prefer?
A day at the beach.
All right. Steve?
Beach for me as well, please.
All right.
Bravo.
You got a couple beach. Hey, we didn't say anything about that. All right.
Okay. So Steve, we'll start with you on this. Who has better musicians? Where do the better musicians come from? England or Ireland?
Oh, England, and specifically Birmingham and Manchester.
Oh, okay. And so, are we talking about the Hollies? Where are we going with this? Who's going to offer up? Oh no, excuse me. I should be thinking 80s pop rock. Sorry, with Steve. Who comes from Birmingham and Manchester? That is top of the list.
So the Electric Light Orchestra and New Order.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
All right.
Nuala, how about you?
It has to be Ireland, of course. Top of the list, U2, Enya, The Cranberries, Van Morrison, Sinead O'Connor. How about that?
Oh, just slam on the just more is better. Fantastic. Okay.
I think Nuala's just mentioned everyone.
I'm not sure who else is left. Sorry.
There you go. All right. Not to go down this road any further, but we are. All right. And Nuala, I think you start this one. Guinness or Newcastle?
I don't drink Guinness, so it has to be Newcastle.
I thought we'd go. Okay, there we go.
Kurt was looking to spark more international, idiosyncratic
conflict here
issues
between the Irish beer and the English beer. Steve?
So yeah, I love beer. Just not so much
those two choices. Okay.
And Nuala, as a a runner, do you even drink beer?
No, and I'm going to give you a laugh. I've never heard of Newcastle beer. How about that? But I don't drink Guinness, so I just voted for the alternative.
Okay. So no Smittix or Harp or anything like that either.
No, wine. I'm a wine woman.
Okay. Any particular wine, or is it anything that's red, or are you an ABC, anything but Chardonnay kind of drinker?
No, probably first choice would always go for a Malbec.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, we're just really plowing through the speed round, aren't we here? Okay, so here's our speed round question. I think who are we going to start with? Nuala?
Actually, either of them can answer this one. This is a toss up.
All right. So why is behavioral spelled wrong in the GAABS name on the website?
It has a
U in it.
Extra U in it. You spell it the wrong way.
We spelt it the global way. We took the world into consideration. When we did this.
That's so virtuous.
Well,
we thought.
Sorry. Well, there was another reason. Our articles are actually associated in Switzerland, so we had a Swiss motivation for it as well. So that's why we chose. So we did debate it.
Oh,
you did.
We did.
That's interesting. Okay, good to know. Okay, well, let's start with give us a definition, and maybe we'll just start with Nuala since you're kind of on it. Nuala, why don't you just start with a definition of what is GAABS and what is GAABS out to do?
Okay. Well, I guess you've touched on the first point, which is it's a global member-based association. And the difference is that there are quite a few associations for behavioral scientists, but this one is different because it's for applied behavioral scientists. It's a non-profit, and I guess the main point is its key goal is really to set an ethical standard of behavior. So we try to provide a kite mark, if you like, for bona fide practitioners in the field. It's member financed and it's member based, and we have done it in conjunction with academia and practitioners. So we can go on to talk about this, but we saw a major gap in the field in terms of being regulated. Every industry that you look across outside of this field, has a regulatory body, if you like, and we thought that this was missing. There was no professional body. The experiments and the interventions that practitioners are applying basically aren't regulated. So it fills that stewardship gap in the field. And at the end of the day, we have launched it, and it has been a huge success so far. And I should point out that you've Steve and I on the show here, but there have been a fantastic group who have done this, and they're not here now, but we do represent 2 out of the founding team of 10 from a number of different groups who I think are certainly worth referencing on the show here.
I think our origins came about from a conversation that took place about 2.5 years ago now at the London School of Economics, which for the past 5 years has been running a really successful Masters in Behavioral Science program, but an exec masters. So for people that wanted to, do a postgraduate degree, but at the same time wanted to kind of stay in the day job. And a number of people that were attracted to the program, which, by the way, was directed by Paul Dolan, were interested in understanding and getting a professional qualification in behavioral science so that they could go practice, they could set up a consultancy, et cetera, et cetera. And we had an alumni event, summer of 2018, it was, right, Nuala? Yeah.
Yep.
And there was several hundred people from the LSE there. And one of the consistent conversations that came up, Kurt, was there are so many people out there now that are claiming to do behavioral science. And really the only kind of qualification they seem to have is they've read Nudge, or they've read Thinking Fast and Slow, or they've read Influence. And that seems to qualify them now to be able to go practice and sell behavioral science. And you can understand how someone that's, invested a lot of time and a lot of money to go to, a Russell League university to get a master's in behavioral science is probably a little bit disappointed that their lunch is being eaten by someone who hasn't gone through those stringent steps and is basically hawking a service on the basis of a book they've read. And, if you think about it, you wouldn't dream of, taking advice from a lawyer whose only qualification is they've read, I don't know, Law School for Dummies, or you wouldn't have a heating engineer come in and install central heating in your home on the basis of the fact that they've, seen a how-to YouTube video. So we have those standards in plumbing, we have those standards in law, we have those standards in accountancy, in all professional services. Why shouldn't we have them in behavioral science as well? Yeah. That was the origin of the conversation. And I know that lots of groups around the world have been talking about that, but it just seemed that there was a momentum building from that alumni group within the LSE to actually stop talking about it and start doing something about it. And that was the origins of what is now the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists.
So talk a little bit, Nuala, you started to talk about like how it came together and the actual components of it, but who were the leading people? Because you had some really prominent behavioral scientists, that researchers as well as practitioners on this. So maybe talk about the board and how it came about.
Yeah, it's a great point, Kurt. And we have an advisory board, and our advisory board has those leading academics. And just to name a few, I mean, we were very lucky to have Daniel Kahneman, who, in fairness, worked with Paul in the past, and we made the approach, and we were very keen to have him, obviously, because we think that he would have made a real difference to the field. But not only that, there were quite a few. Bob, as you know, Bob Cialdini, Jennifer Lerner from the Harvard Kennedy School, again a superb leading contributor in the field here. Maya Shankar, also from the White House, now with Google. We've got quite a few. And what we deliberately did was try to have a board and people who could represent the field, who would not just put a credibility stamp on it, but people who were really passionate about trying to make a difference, trying to make sure that not just that the field was future-proofed, if you like, and made more legitimate, but also helped develop the next generation of thinkers. So there are two components to this, and Steve rightly touched on the first group, which is the behavioral scientists themselves, which need to be qualified, vetted, accredited, etc. But the other group that's seriously at risk here, if we don't have this, are clients, corporations, who use behavioral scientists. And the problem is that this field is so attractive, it's exploding in popularity, that people are rebranding themselves as either from HR or marketing to being behavioral scientists, that people are going out with false labeling, if you like. And and because they're quite good at selling, and we've got like the greatest hits of behavioral science, in our back pocket, people in companies are believing these stories and taking people who may not be as qualified as we would hope and want them to be. So the risk is, it is a serious business risk when some of these experiments fail in companies. And there is a replication crisis in the field. There's a lack of people admitting whether experiments fail in the field. So can you imagine the implication when it comes to companies? Because then you really do have people's lives at stake, whether it's citizens or whether it's employees, with these experiments that can and have gone wrong. I mean, there've been quite a few well-known ones, from the world of prisons. But there have been many others in healthcare as well, and I think this is serious consequences. So it's a two-sided initiative, if you like. So it protects the behavioral science from being sued, if you like, and also it protects companies. So that's why the regulation really matters. But the advisory board, their role is to help guide the field and to help work with the exec, with us. And it's, Steve, myself, and, Torben Emmerling from advisory, effective advisory is on the exec as well. So what we do is basically we've engaged them, and whether it's about writing papers, whether it's appearing at events, whether it's giving us counsel about what we should be doing differently. But they're an integral part of the GAABS Association.
Yeah, it's interesting when I hear you talk about protecting businesses. And Steve, you mentioned this too, that anybody just having read Nudge or Thinking Fast and Slow puts a shingle up and does it. And I think a lot of people might go, oh, that's that independent individual person that's just going out and doing it, and you would never hire them anyway. But I have seen, and not to name names, but I mean there are some large consulting organizations that have a behavioral science arm that they've recently done, and you look at the people on that team, and there are no behavioral scientists on that team. They have their consultants or other things, and you kind of have to wonder where that insight and background, and do they have the qualifications that you're talking about? So I can see the value that this brings, not just from that worry, oh, it's going to be that person who is, going out and is an individual, consultant, and now they're claiming they're a behavioral scientist on this, and they're going to come in and help. But it is some of those other aspects where you kind of go, oh, they're a well-respected company and they have this arm, and yet do they really have the knowledge and the expertise to be able to come in and consult? And to Nuala, what you said is it protects those companies from that as well. So I applaud you on that. And, as you're thinking about that. So is there a way for businesses then is there a listing? I mean, so if I'm a company out there and I'm listening to this and I go, that makes sense. So now what do I do? Do I have to look for a GAABS certified consultant? Is there an easy way to find one? How does that work? What does GAABS do for that?
There is. There will be an increasingly easy way of finding a bona fide behavioral scientist that is a GAABS approved member. That's one of the benefits of joining GAABS. If you do have a legitimate set of experiences, and one thing I think is really important to point out here, Kurt and Tim, is that GAABS we haven't set out to be restrictive. We haven't set out to close the door. We're not only accepting membership from PhDs and, those with advanced degrees. I think there's a place, and a very valuable and important place, for those people that maybe aren't necessarily in possession of a master's degree or a PhD in one of the behavioral sciences, but actually has tenure in the applied fields. They've worked for 10, 20 years. They've made a contribution to the field. They've maybe written a book. They've maybe applied some insight in a meaningful way. They have credibility themselves. They are more pracademic than academic.
I like that.
I like that too. Yeah.
And we absolutely want to open the doors and welcome those types of members as well. So yes, I think it's going to be attractive for organizations. Organizations themselves with behavioral insight teams can actually join as well. There's an organizational facility for them to join. It's really interesting just reflecting on what I was hearing you say about organizations that claim to do behavioral science and perhaps don't have a legitimate behavioral scientist or an applied behavioral scientist in their organization. I think one of the reasons for that is that I'm not convinced that we as an industry, behavioral science, has found a home yet within the organization. Where do we sit? Are we part of HR? Are we part of marketing? Are we performance and operation? Should we be informing strategy, or are we brought in at the last minute to kind of polish and make as optimal as possible an idea or a strategy? And I think if we don't have a legitimate home, no surprise that those in those departments are claiming responsibility for us, claiming ownership for us. And so, I see situations where marketing organizations, PR agencies, communication companies, creative agencies now have their behavioral science team. There's Joe in the corner, that red nudge. So he's head of our behavioral science team now. Right. And I think one of the reasons for that is that not only is it, a growing field, as Nuala said, it's growing enormously, but the cost of entry is pretty low. And if you're an agency and you're already speaking to the marketing departments of these organizations, you've got a ready in. Whereas I think, access for behavioral scientists to those kind of decision makers isn't perhaps as well established and as mature as some of the traditional consultancies. Because we don't have that place to live organizationally yet, I think that's adding to the challenge.
Well, at the same time, and I want to direct this question to Nuala, there are some who have argued that behavioral science should at some point become transparent or invisible, I should say, in an organization, and should simply be adopted as among policymakers, among HR, among marketers, among UX, CX designers. That it should simply be integrated into all of those functions. What do you think about that?
I actually agree, Tim. I think it should. But organizations don't work like that because they're so siloed. Behavioral science is needed from everything from compliance to risk to legal. Pick any of the functions, and there is a role for a behavioral scientist. But the problem is, how can a behavioral scientist you've got so many different subcultures in any organization that, HR, sneer is probably the wrong word, but, everyone if everyone was drawing a circle, they all put their own function at the center of the circle. So there is functional rivalry, there is interdisciplinary discord. People think in silos. I'm an IT person. What would I be doing with a marketing person? I mean, I used to integrate teams myself, and I literally had, designers, compared to relationship managers, and they were saying, well, what do I want to listen and speak to this person for? It's absolutely everywhere. So to answer the question, I think it's absolutely critical. And what we need is, to Kurt's question, which was, how do you know? You need to be able to find these behavioral scientists who have a holistic view of an organization and aren't narrow-minded in their own fields. Like, I'm the healthcare person, so I can only talk about healthcare, or I'm the incentives person, so I'll only speak to HR. We need these broad behavioral scientists who can go in and speak at the top, from the top level. This is board level. I mean, look at Theranos. If they had access to a behavioral scientist, would all of that really have happened? I mean, there are some horror stories. I mean, that whole book, the Bad Blood book, is just a horror story of what a behavioral scientist could have done with that company. From the top down, from the day when the board decided to fire the CEO, and guess what? She persuaded them that, give me another chance, please. I mean, have you ever heard of that anywhere? So the lack of governance, having the behavioral scientists from the top down, I think, will safeguard companies in the future, and is the most undervalued skill there is. I'm 30 years working with corporates, and if they had more behavioral scientists, they would have avoided so much reputational damage and probably have made a lot more money. into the bargain. So as far as it can be done, I think it can be done. But I'm sure, Steve, you probably have something to add on this.
Well, I think we have a supply side issue. There's not many of us. And so therefore, was it Urkelov that's talked about the market for lemons? If there's not enough supply of good stuff, then lemons will emerge and will start to fill those holes where the opportunities lie. And I think we are, and I think it's important that we recognize at the relative early stages of the promise that applied behavioral science brings. I know in previous episodes that you, Tim, and Kurt have broadcast that I've listened to and enjoyed, that you've spoken to people about the history of behavioral science, right back to the, Kurt Lewin of the 1940s and beyond. And, then consumerism and behaviorism and all those great names from the, early 50s right through to the 80s and 90s and the present day. There's a rich area for us to mine. But in terms of the applied opportunity so far, we're very, very early on. And there aren't that many applied behavioral scientists, legitimate ones that are actually out there that are studying to the point where they say, I want to do this for a living, in the same way as a lawyer wants to study law, a doctor wants to study and practice medicine. And all the time we've got that supply side scarcity, I think this problem is going to continue to exist.
Steve, I think you bring up a really important point there, this idea both of the scarcity aspect and then the lemons that result as a part of that, because hey, there's more demand than there is supply. So anybody, again, puts that shingle out and they may not have that qualification or the expertise. But there's also this aspect of it's a relatively new field. And yes, it has roots back into the 1950s. And you could probably even really go back into, well before that with some of the psychology and various different pieces of it. But it really hit its stride in the, from a research perspective, 90s, 2000s, and then became popular with the introduction, as you said, of some of these books of Nudge and Thinking Fast and Slow and Predictably Irrational. And so it became more commonplace in the market. And one of the, I tell the story, I got invited into a senior level executive meeting because they had read Drive by Dan Pink, which, I can disagree with a lot of what Dan said in there. But what was nice is he brought in the concept of what behavioral science is, and in other words, into a C-level suite that they had not thought of before. That being said, I think one of the interesting pieces, and Tim and I have talked about this, is that at least in my opinion, maybe you guys have a different perspective of this. I see behavioral science being applied inside businesses. Actually, it's not inside businesses. It's more of a consumer-facing side than it is actually applied internally inside of organizations. I see that as being a much more rich and having greater impact and more focus within organizations. Are you guys seeing the same thing? And do you think there is value? Nuala, you were kind of bringing this up in just some of the negative case studies that you were talking about. Is there a role for being internally looking at employees and our strategic thinking versus just a consumer facing, how do we get people to, try our product or to, adhere to our prescriptions or whatever that would be?
I think, Kurt, that's a great question. I think and it plays to your point about why the field has grown. The more visible, the more salient conversations and messages from the field fall into that consumer research area. The public policy area gets a lot of attention and profile. Organization behavior does not. Or organization behavior, judgment, decision-making, employees, there isn't an element of employee behavior that isn't susceptible to these problems. Motivation. We're talking motivation of consumers, motivation of people in organizations. All the bad behavior, top-down behavior, all of the ethical conduct. Name any of the behavioral science mechanisms, and each one of them can be applied in an organization. But as you say, the challenge is that the C-suite who basically would pay the bills for this, even though I don't think we're half as expensive as some of those large consulting firms, and we're not. But the problem is that on the one hand, it's a double-edged sword. The Daniel Pinks that you were talking about, or the nudge or influence, get people excited, but that's where it stops. And Steve and I have talked about this a few times. Are we good as a field at selling ourselves? Well, on the one hand, you could say, yes, aren't we great? Look at all these bestsellers, the best-selling books. But on the other hand, well, maybe we're not that good if we're not able to sell ourselves enough to the audiences, and to a C-suite audience is very different. Because basically you're showing them how warped they are and how irrational they are in their thinking, and really who wants to pay you to be told they're irrational? It's, no one wants to be told they've an ugly baby or a dysfunctional team, least of all that you're a dysfunctional leader. But the truth is that all of these biases can prove evidentially how many mistakes organizations repeatedly and predictably make without having access to even basic confirmation bias. Even if you were to test your team on status quo bias, how willing they are to change, how willing they are to adapt, how willing they are to innovate. Every executive is smart enough to know not to jeopardize their career by talking about, hey, I don't want to change. So why would they do that? But as a senior leader, you actually are being fooled in many ways because people are smart enough and smooth enough to cover up the way they really feel about things. And as a result, the organization misses out on pace of change, trajectory, and any kind of transformation. So it is a minefield of human error in organizations. But hopefully, I think that's the next phase of our field, to try and take the message there.
Earlier in the conversation, Nuala, you brought up the idea that one of the things that GAABS wants to do is to ensure that sort of future generations are doing better. And I'd like to get both of your thoughts about this aspect of not just certifying, but the implication is that GAABS could have a guiding force in education and application. Is that a fair? Nuala, let me just start with you. You brought up the idea of the future generations. Is that a fair statement?
Education and guidance. I would start with guidance first, Tim.
Okay. Guidance
insofar as I'll tell you what I've noticed in the number of people who've been applying is, I guess, the age profile. And Kurt, you mentioned the independence. There's a huge appetite among younger, really keen, hungry behavioral scientists, people who've got their degrees, are in the early stages, and they really want to learn. So the first thing I think we're offering is this cohesive group and network. Even not that LinkedIn is your guideline for things, but if you can measure, you can measure. And we've noticed a huge number of followers on LinkedIn. We've noticed a huge appetite. As I said, we now have applications from over 20 countries. Now there are a lot more countries left, but in the early stages, that's pretty good going. So what we would like to do is to set this field up in such a way, by using the advisory board, by using, the executive teams, all of their expertise, to give people a better path. The education point is slightly different, and Steve and I and the rest of the team have talked about this. We think we're too early in this phase. What we would like to do is get the membership up and running, to offer, events with leading speakers like yourselves, of course, to attend, to give a different view, and to give people a central port, because that's what GAABS is. Beyond the accreditation, it's a central port for people to come and share their successful case stories, and to learn the mistakes, and maybe find a way to enter into the private sector in a more strategic way, delivering messages that people will actually hear. But Steve, you might have a view in terms of the education aspect.
Well, I think for those that have read anything that Joe and I have written recently, we do think that subjects like basic psychology are not introduced early enough into curriculums. Now, I'm enthused listening to Nuala and talking about GAABS could potentially see a role in the future for an organization like the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists, encouraging earlier adoption of some of behavioral science's basic lessons. And so, the controversial thing that I did go on record as saying, not that anyone was particularly listening, was that I think we've got far too many geography teachers in the world. And what I meant by that was that most countries in the world at age 16, children will have spent upwards of about 2 years studying geography at least, and then they'll take an exam. There's about 40%, I think, at 16 study geography. For psychology, it's less than 2%. So Are we saying that geography is 20 times more important than psychology? Well, if you then look at the entries into higher education, the number of psychology graduates, the number of people that are going into study now, one of the behavioral sciences far outstrips geography. And so, is one of the reasons why we're not maybe encouraging more people into this field, and that we've got this supply side scarcity at the moment, down to the fact that we perhaps aren't introducing something as fundamental as how you behave, why you do the things you do earlier on in the education curriculum. It seems to me that there might be a case for that. And please, for those geography fans out there, I'm not suggesting that we replace geography teachers with psychology teachers, but maybe there's a rebalancing that maybe is worth talking about.
I would agree with you, actually. So I'm actually think that it's a less controversial issue than maybe you think, because I think there is a lot of elements when we think about the educational system, particularly in a primary setting, that we have an antiquated way of looking at that educational curriculum. And we don't have decision sciences in there. We don't have basic psychology that are these fundamental learning pieces that if we did, we may not have as many of the issues that we currently do in the world. And I'm, coming from a very American-centric place here, but I'm just looking at the politics that are going on and some of the misinformation and people, believing in these falsities or not believing in science. And partly because I don't think they understand how science works. And just that literacy is vital. And I believe I would wholeheartedly agree with you on your thoughts there, Steve. And even from the perspective, we got Google Maps. Why do we need geography? Come on. I mean, you can just Google Maps.
I think I can remember what an oxbow lake is, but entirely what I would do that information, I'm not entirely sure. But just to come back on your point and just to reinforce it, this is not just me saying this. I mean, you look at Steven Pinker describes psychology as a hub science.
Yeah.
And when he talks about it, he talks about psychology being in the very center, and it's partly biology. It's partly social science. If you look at anthropology, sociology, economics, but it's art as well. How do we appreciate art? How do we form opinions? How do we think, I like that, I don't like that, I listen to that person, not that person? It really is. He's exactly right. It is a hub science. And surely we should be teaching hub sciences at an earlier age and not allowing people to opt in with their wallets at age 18, 19, 20.
Yeah, I think what Steve has described in the classroom is reflected completely in the boardroom. The overweighting of the harder skills, if you like, compared to the softer skills. And let's face it, behavioral science the word science doesn't hold that much rigor. The word behavior is soft. Sometimes it's gender related, and people see it as a soft skill. So, do you see a CFO at the table, with finance, you see a CRO for risk. Do you see as many CMOs for marketing or a CHRO for human resources? You don't. If you look at the composition of non-executive roles, how many of them are looking for hard audit and risk skills? There are very few now who, although there are a few, and it is growing, but it's too few, who actually have an appreciation for culture. And when I say culture, I mean behavioral science would fall into that category. But there is still a very strong overweighting of the hard skills rather than the soft skills, and that is permeated throughout organizations with, I guess, an overweighting of IQ over EQ. So I think there is more than one challenge. I think, and Steve is absolutely right. It does start in the classroom, but it gets reflected, as I said, in the boardroom and also in the courtroom. So again, these are very big topics and very big areas, but huge areas where behavioral science can make a significant and material difference, not just to individuals, but to organizations and society.
Yeah, Nuala, you remind me, I did work 20 plus years ago now, where we were going in and we were working with a new CEO brought into a large restaurant chain. And he made the statement, he said that the hard skills are now easy and the soft skills are now hard. And we worked on that. We were working on, looking at those softer interpersonal skills and various different things. And the sad thing is he was gone within a year. Like the board said, no, it didn't get the immediate financial results. Therefore, he was gone. And if you look at that, that is the situation. This is the payoffs of this are not an immediate payoff in many instances, or to a degree, they're not that immediate payoff. And so you have a executive level leadership that are looking for things that have more of a short term payback. And I think behavioral science is not, yes, we can nudge things and we can show some really powerful impacts on different pieces. But when we actually integrate it throughout the organizations, the long-term impact on that, you talked about this, is in our decision-making and our risk and respectability for the company and long-term interactions of who stays and who leaves and a variety of other factors that don't happen overnight. And I think that's part of the issue. So.
It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while for us to be seen less as the polish and more as the chassis.
That brings me to a question that I think that we're kind of bubbling up naturally here. And what are the biggest challenges that we face in behavioral science in the coming decade?
Yeah, I think we've kind of already alluded to one of them, which is why GAABS was formed, which is to have some sense of professionalism and legitimacy and credibility, and not just to be that add-on that we bring someone in that's read a popular book. So I think we've got a lot of work to do there, and I think all these things we've talked about from the starting point of education. How do we bring more young, bright, smart minds into our discipline and our industry? That's going to be really, really important. How do we engage with those that move into higher education, and how do we embrace those practitioners out there that are doing a really great job, that do want to represent the highest standards of our science and our discipline, and how do we build a community of them so that we have a voice and we're not necessarily being crowded out by those individual operators that perhaps are just looking at that next buck in the same way as Nuala says, that short-term focus that boards often have. A lot of practitioners out there that perhaps don't have a legitimate rationale for being considered credible, they too have a short-term focus. What can I sell today that's going to pay the rent, pay the mortgage, these kind of things. So I think that's certainly one place. And I think this other idea that we need to be prepared to increasingly move to bigger, chunkier, knottier, vastly more complex issues like organizational change, like climate change, like ethics and risk and all these other things, and be prepared to step into that deeper pool and recognize that we don't have all the answers, and we probably never will have all the answers, but we can be part of the answer. Otherwise, I think we do run the risk of potentially being those people that you bring in at the last minute to optimize a strategy, as opposed to those folks that have a legitimate role and a voice at the table to inform it. That's, I think, the inherent challenge at the moment.
Yeah, I'd probably add to that. And I suppose the first thing that I thought of as we were going through this was the positioning. And maybe it's that point that we say we're not good at positioning ourselves. Well, for me, you've got data science and, data analysis that has just boomed, big data. So if we marry behavioral science with data science, we actually have an in. So it's that EQ, IQ. If we position ourselves as the other side of that, I think we're building on something that's already there. And I think that could be a very strong angle that we could take. The other, and every challenge is the opportunity as well, of course. I think a challenge, which could be a challenge, is that we create a star culture here in this field. That, okay, we know all the big names, but that's not everybody. There's an awful lot of terrific work being done by other people, and maybe the field needs to stop looking in the mirror so often and just to each other and start to look out a little bit more. So I feel that it's a very inward looking field, which is not surprising, because this is all about looking at the self, and it's psychology based, and we analyze ourselves before we analyze anyone else. So we're all really interested in the self, but that can stop us looking outside of ourselves enough, which I think is something that might be looked at as well. And the other one is I would build on Steve's point. I think some of the interventions that are looked at are small scale, are short term. There are massive problems. Okay, Steve mentioned climate change, but there's domestic violence, there's genocide, there are these huge societal problems, and it doesn't mean that we can't make a difference in these areas. Now we're getting an opportunity with the vaccines to do something in that space. But in terms of these other areas, I think the role of behaviour, we're only getting started, and I think that opportunity is there. But if we stay too narrow, if we don't penetrate the large organizations with this thinking, because the large organizations, they're the donors, they're the funders, they have massive influence with governments and with other industry associations, I think we're missing a trick. So that, for me, is we just need to think of ourselves in a more holistic way and go to market in a more holistic way for larger scale impact.
I think Nuala makes a really good point about us being outward looking, and we need to get better at that. And we perhaps need to seek assistance and training in that as well. The reason that you saw me laughing kind of off camera a moment or two ago was that as Nuala was talking, I was reminded a few weeks ago, I was asked the question, what is the collective term for a group of behavioral scientists? And the first word that came to mind was a reflection.
That's a fantastic term.
Wow.
And
I'm just diving in on that. I'm just like letting that soak in.
So here is the I think this is the most important question that we could have all this episode. And I'm amazed that Tim hasn't asked it already. So does Gabs have an official song? And if they don't, do they want Tim to write one?
We would love Tim to write one. Tim, the challenge has now been set.
Oh my God. Total setup. Kurt, you are so in the shit for that one.
Yeah, sorry, man. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
we do not. But we'd seek your wisdom and counsel on perhaps thinking about one. To me, I think it should have the word open or welcome or something like of that sentiment in the title.
And a reflection in there, there you go. We'll bring that all together. We'll come back to you, and Tim will have his entry in for the official Gabs song as we go.
Love that.
Oh man, the retribution is going to be swift and hard. Let me just tell you that.
Yeah. Let's talk about Tim. Once you've actually selected the song for us, perhaps what we will be able to do is get our website people. So every time someone goes to gaabs.org to register and then to join, maybe the theme tune that you've selected for us plays at the same time.
I can see it happening. This is good.
That's better than having them memorize the theme song and have to recite it, at their certification ceremony.
Before every conference that you guys have, everybody gets up and sings the theme song. Yeah.
No. Let's talk about playlists. Let's talk about playlists. Nuala, what are you listening to these days?
Well, mine is pretty eclectic. I have, at the moment, if I was to open it right now, last few songs I listened to I had Mike and the Mechanics.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Mike and the Mechanics. I like that.
Haven't heard that name in
I
ages.
know,
Yes.
I know. Fleetwood Mac, believe it or not. So I heard The Chain on the radio, so I put some more on. So I've been listening to a few of those. God, I love that album. So mine have been taking me back a little bit. And then I think I also have Rod Stewart, because once upon a time I saw Rod Stewart in Vegas, and he was a lot better than I had remembered. So I thought Rod always brings you up. So
fantastic.
So it's pretty eclectic. I think there's a bit of Hozier in there, Queen. Nothing Irish, I hasten to add.
That's okay. How about you, Steve? What's on your playlist these days?
Well, actually, I'm the same theme as Nuala that we've been doing with the in-laws is, on these weekly Zoom calls that everyone has to have now, and they live some, way away from us, is, we're kind of exchanging, what are you playing on Spotify? And they're having a bit of, a kind of trip down memory lane, and they've been playing us some of the songs that they were listening to when they were dating. And it was really, so a couple of the artists are super well known, but it just reintroduced me to them. So The Who, they were big fans of The Who. And the other one, actually, which, because you only ever think about this person as the singer of one of the James Bond theme tunes, Carly Simon. But she has got a pretty extensive and impressive back catalogue, and it's amazing. So we've been listening to some of those. And then one name that I'd never heard of before, way before my time, but our in-laws, the moment they played this, I think on Spotify, when they playing a song, it suggested another one. They went, oh my God, you remember this? And it was just wonderful to learn. It's almost like they wanted to say, can we come off the Zoom call for a minute? Because we want to go and dance together with this song. It was a song by Joan Baez, Diamonds and Rust. It came up, we started playing it. And so it's opened up a kind of whole set of different avenues of very, very way back songs that ordinarily I wouldn't listen to. But as a result of lockdown and kind of sharing the in-laws playlist. So that's where I'm at.
That song is Joan Baez's homage to her romance with Bob Dylan.
Oh,
yeah, which was a many-year, on and off kind of a thing, and it came away kind of bittersweet for Joan. She was, she doesn't say that it's all rust, but she doesn't say it's all diamonds either. So.
Oh well, there you go. So maybe my mother-in-law sees my father-in-law as her Bob Dylan. Maybe that's
not going to editorialize on that one. Nope.
Yeah.
No, definitely not.
All right, Steve, Nuala, thank you. This, as always, you guys are wonderful guests with great insights, and thank you for what you're doing with Gabs and just the field in general. I think this is a opportunity, as you guys pointed out very, very nicely, that hey, we're moving into the future, and as part of that movement, this is something that we saw as necessary. And thank you for taking those steps and moving it forward. And we are big fans as always, and so we'll thank you.
We'll be looking out for your applications, gentlemen.
Thanks to you both. It's been really great to be here. So really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
To our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our discussion with Nuala and Steve, have a free-flowing conversation, and talk about whatever else comes into our GAABS certified brains.
Don't you love
but wait,
that?
We're not actually GAABS certified yet. We have our applications in, and we're almost there. Maybe they'll accept us. It's a high hurdle. I don't know. They might accept you and not me.
Dude, you've got the PhD. If anybody gets
you have the knowledge. You are the rock star of this duo. I'm the pretty face,
So you're the lead singer that's out front getting all the kudos, but I'm the guy doing all the musical arrangements to make it sound good. Is that kind of what you're saying?
You're playing the bass, the guitar, the drums, the piano. you're actually singing lead on all of the tracks on the album, and I'm just up there lip syncing in the actual show.
Okay,
it's my beautiful hair. That's what it's.
Yeah, I can hear it actually in the breeze. So where should we start our grooving session today?
Well, let's just talk about what the hell GAABS is doing. I mean, it is this organization that is going to trying to set the standard around applied behavioral scientists. And I think that this is something we've talked about in the past, is that this idea that anybody can put a shingle up and just say, I'm a behavioral scientist. And there's not any way of really going back and saying, well, what is a behavioral scientist? What is the certification or the qualifications that you need in order to call yourself a behavioral scientist? And so This is what GAABS is setting out to do.
Yeah, I love, I think it was Nuala or Steve, both of them kind of argued that we got certifications for doctors and lawyers and plumbers and carpenters and truck drivers, and there's guilds and unions that signify certain levels of expertise. So why the hell not behavioral science?
Yeah,
there's this part of me that's just like, why not? So I'm really glad that Steve and Nuala and their co-founders have agreed to set up this association to start that monitoring process.
Well, and I think it's important for organizations who are looking to bring people in, because I think this idea that we talked about that, hey, I read Nudge, I read Predictably Irrational, therefore I am a behavioral scientist practitioner because I listened to Kurt and Tim talk about it on Behavioral Group's podcast.
That should be a red flag right there.
Well, we love that. We love that there's this interest in it. I think it gets into the part where what qualifies as an actual behavioral scientist, and what does that mean, particularly in an applied setting where you're looking at, actually in an academic setting, I think there's further rigor, but in an applied setting, what does that mean? And who can put that shingle up to say that? And what I do appreciate, because this is the piece that always worries me about this, is that it becomes this little exclusive country club that you need to have a master's degree or a PhD in this. And I don't think, and what I love is that they have said, no, that's not what we're looking for. There's a lot of knowledge that has been garnered through actually people doing the work over years and years and years, and being part of the community of building up this knowledge and sharing this knowledge and expanding on this knowledge just through the field work that they're doing, the work that is so important, and recognizing some of that.
Yeah, I could easily imagine the field breaking down without some sort of oversight, without some sort of cohesive view of it. And I think that is absolutely a good thing. And to take into account that there's many people who are deeply steeped in knowledge and practice, but don't have a PhD is a big positive for me as somebody that doesn't have a PhD. I got talked out of the PhD.
You are a pracademic, as Steve mentioned, right? I love that. The idea that you're not necessarily an academic, you're a pracademic, and that, which is a really good piece of this. I think the one piece, and we didn't talk to this about them, but we can definitely reach out and talk to them, is, so what is the path? You think of, as you said, a carpenter, right? You have a journeyman carpenter, and then you have an apprentice carpenter.
You start with apprentice, and then you move up to journeyman, right? And then and master.
You have the master, and then you have the apprentice. And is there a way of giving a designation for those who, haven't gone back and gotten a master's and haven't spent 10 years of their life doing this, but they're steeped in researching this and in trying to apply it, and they might have been doing it for a few years? And is there another designation that is necessary? And maybe that comes as the organization matures and that we start getting this in. And at this point, we just need to start setting this bar and figuring that out. But that's something I could see, would be beneficial. I think there's a lot of people out there. I think the interest in this has been growing significantly, exponentially to a certain degree. And we need to allow and figure out how to bring those people into the fold and into the fold quickly, not having to necessarily wait for that 20 years of experience before you can be considered a practicing behavioral scientist.
Yeah. Boy, that's really well said. I also wanted to touch a bit on Steve's comment about when he was talking about how the group got formed and how they were I think he was having a conversation with like Paul Dolan at the LSE, at the London School of Economics, which just sounds
having a simple conversation with Dolan and these others. That's no biggie.
So aside from the cartoon book kind of amazement of just thinking about that informality, it's collaboration, right? We come together, we talk about things, we exchange ideas, and things bubble up. And it's hard during the pandemic to make that happen. It's certainly not going to happen in this way. But I just think that this is a really cool thing, and I just want to encourage more collaboration in the world. If you've got ideas, share them with somebody, talk to somebody about them. All right, get them out there. But behavioral groups wouldn't exist if you and I hadn't had a conversation about actually it wasn't even about what could we do together. It ended. Lunch ended with and you saying, well, why shouldn't we do something together?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, what should we do? And then we brainstormed and had a bunch of silly ideas, and this floated to the top.
Well, this didn't even float to the top. It was the meetup. And then this was just a happy accident that happened afterwards. So, but you're right. When you bring the right people together and you start just having those conversations. And what I loved is the informalness of, we just had a conversation, started talking about this. That's where creativity, where new ideas, where inspiration can happen, where you are in a group setting and you're bouncing these thoughts, these ideas that then click something in your brain and light up different neurotransmitters get fired, and you're going off, and all of a sudden new connections are made and the neural networks are all going off, and wow, all of a sudden you end up with this new crazy idea that isn't really crazy and is actually fantastic. So get out there and collaborate, people. Collaborate with us too. We'd love to hear from you. So anyway.
Yeah.
All right. What else, Tim?
I loved the conversation that Nuala brought up when she was talking about the application, the business of application, right? Of where social sciences have made their way into business. And so she kind of teed up this idea of name any of the behavioral science mechanisms, and each one of them can be applied in an organization. So it just got me thinking about, well, we've been applying, psychology has been a part of advertising for a long time, right? Yeah. So it goes back quite a ways. I think it goes back to the 1890s when Harlow.
1890s?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean,
that's like great grandpa time. Man, that's old. Psychology is even psychology that old? Come on.
It's like Sigmund Freud was midlife, I don't know. It was, at that point.
In his cocaine years, was that when he
could have been? Could have been. But
I'm sorry, I digress. So yeah.
The idea. So there has been. So this history goes back a long time, and I think and that's in advertising specifically. But there's a part of me that feels like isn't it about time that we started doing that with HR and marketing and CX and. Yeah, we could use the scientific method to improve those.
Right. So going back to that initial piece, right? I mean, there were people that were bringing this study into the real world and applying some of the theories and practices and getting that in. And to that point, I think you're absolutely right. We need to start taking these insights these wonderful academics that we talk to are learning and discovering, and apply those into the real world. And as we talked about, I think the customer facing side has gotten it much more than the internal facing side within organizations. That the marketing, advertising, UX design, product design, those things that touch the customer are much more steeped in behavioral science and bringing behavioral science insights into it than, say, the HRs, the systems design, even engineering process components internal to an organization, and even the C-suite, right? Where the C-suite is looking at strategy, but they're not necessarily taking a behavioral science lens to that strategy. And those are places where, if you think about the impact that can have, that's pretty damn good.
It is. Even though we've got a history of bringing science into the business world. I think Harry Hollingsworth in the 1930s had this study on caffeine that was funded by Coca-Cola, and he was really kind of nervous about doing the study because it was being funded by Coca-Cola. And so he set up a double-blind scenario. He used science to make sure that he was adhering to something that could be objectively proven, right? Yeah. Whether or not caffeine had an effect on us and what the effects were. So when we do this, when the business world adopts a scientific method, we get a lot out of it. And you and I have talked about this a bunch, but man, I want to encourage businesses to not only focus on what, but take some time to focus on why. Mm-hmm. Ask the academic question. Try to understand why, because all of our client relationships, all of our internal relationships with the internal customers, the employees, HR could benefit so much from understanding more about why and not just about what and how, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I can't add to that because that was just beautiful.
Yeah, I know that.
And absolutely on target. I mean, you think about this. I mean, hey, business has brought science in. There's business academics, all of those people that are coming in. I think the piece that we're saying is, look, there's a role for the social sciences. There's a role for behavioral science that needs to be addressed within organizations and by different parts of the organization than it currently is. So,
yeah. And my last comment, I don't know what you want to wrap up with, but my last comment is that I was so glad that Steve has been thinking about what to call a group of behavioral scientists.
Oh,
I think that the idea of a reflection is more than just kind of clever hyperbole or, analog. I think it's a really cool idea to think about. Oh, and we had a reflection of behavioral scientists in to talk about this. I could just hear it playing out. I just thought it was cool. So
all right. So a gathering of behavioral scientists is called a reflection.
Yeah,
we're gonna push that. We're gonna try to get that into the lexicon. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
All right. So you heard it here first, folks. It was Steve, and he brought it up. But we're gonna be the loudspeaker for it, and we're going to get it happening. All right. So we are a reflection of behavioral scientists.
Yes.
There we go. So I just want to make an apology to any geography teachers or academics out there. We don't mean to disparage you. But there is something around this idea that, hey, we need to expand. We need to get more education earlier in people's lives about behavioral science, about psychology, because it is, as was mentioned, it's this hub part of our world that so much of human interaction and human behavior is rooted in the behavioral science understanding of that behavioral science. And it's just something that we need to really think about and take another view. And it's not saying that geography isn't important. It is, but we also have to think about the importance of behavioral science. So with that.
And thank goodness, just one last thought about this. Thank goodness that people like Annie Duke are taking some action to bring decision-making to grade school students. Like with her Alliance for Decision Education, which is right now only based in Philadelphia, her home. We need more of that. We need more curriculum, system-wide types of curriculum around psychology and decision-making. So, yeah.
Cool.
Okay, with that, we got a bonus track coming right up, and Kurt is going to read the beautiful bonus track today.
Is it beautiful because you wrote it? Hey Groovers, this is Kurt with your bonus track and groove idea for the week. In our conversation with Steve and Nuala, we started with what GAABS is as an organization, and with the definition of what GAABS is, the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists. It's a governing body that is open to those who demonstrate their ability to ethically apply behavioral science to their work. We continued the conversation on a more philosophical note to talk about what is working and what is lacking in applied behavioral science these days. We all agree that there are many opportunities to expand the application of behavioral science in many fields, and we believe that education is critical to making that happen. We like Steve's somewhat controversial comment that students need more psychology and less geography. Although geography is important, we know he was only kind of kidding. For all of the biases and heuristics that have been revealed in recent years through behavioral science, we can imagine a future that brings more psychology to the classroom of younger and younger students. All right, for your groove idea for the week, we'd like you to think about what you're doing to apply behavioral science to your job, on your team, and at your company. Or maybe you've applied some behavioral science in your personal life. Have you tried using a tiny habit that relies on a trigger, like doing a push-up after every time you've gone and used the bathroom? Or at your work, have you found that by changing the default in your team meetings from what problems do we need to solve to what opportunities for improvement do we have this week? And is that making a positive difference on your team's productivity or morale? Let us know how you're putting a cool behavioral science hack to use in your work or life, and we'd love to hear about it. With that, Groovers, it's time to wrap up another episode of Behavioral Grooves. We hope that this week you take what you learned from our show and go out and find your groove.